I ran through the final checklist one more time, my fingers moving across the control panel with practiced precision. Every system on the Pathfinder showed green. Life support, communications, navigation, all running perfectly. The surface vessel had been our home for the past 3 weeks while we prepared for this dive, and now everything came down to the next few hours. Manta systems are nominal, I called out to the crew. All pre-dive protocols complete. Dr. Anya Sharma looked up from her biological sampling equipment, her dark eyes bright with excitement. She'd been preparing for this moment since we'd first detected the anomalous readings from the Viridian Trench 6 months ago. Her equipment was arranged with scientific precision. Specimen containers, analysis tools, and monitoring devices all secured for the descent. "Biology station ready," she said, tapping her fingers against the console in that way she did when she was thinking through complex problems. All sampling protocols loaded and verified. Marcus Sullivan emerged from the engineering bay, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. His red hair was disheveled from crawling around the mechanical systems, but his blue eyes held the confidence of someone who knew every bolt and wire in the submersible. "Engineering checks complete," he said. "Pressure hull integrity at 100%, ballast systems responding normally, and the new thermal shielding is performing better than expected." I nodded and moved toward the Manta. The submersible sat in its launch cradle like a sleeping giant, 30 feet of titanium and advanced composites designed to withstand pressures that would crush a human body in milliseconds. The hull gleamed under the deck lights, and I could see my reflection in the polished metal as I approached the entry hatch. "Final crew briefing," I said, turning to face Anya and Marcus. "We're attempting something no one has ever done before. Every previous expedition to the Viridian Trench has been stopped by the thermal barrier at 28,000 feet. The water chemistry changes completely at that depth, and the temperature differential creates a boundary that's turned back every probe and submersible we've sent down." Anya stepped closer, her scientific curiosity overriding any nervousness. "The sonar readings from below the barrier suggest there's something down there. Possibly a completely isolated ecosystem that's been cut off from the rest of the ocean for millions of years." "That's the theory," I said. "But theories don't account for equipment failure or unexpected conditions. If anything goes wrong down there, we're on our own. The Pathfinder can't reach us through the barrier, and rescue operations at that depth are impossible." Marcus checked his tool belt one more time, making sure everything was secure. "The Manta's built for this," he said. "I've personally inspected every system twice. She'll hold together." I looked at both of them. My crew. My responsibility. Anya with her analytical mind and passion for discovery. Marcus with his practical skills and unshakable confidence in the machinery. We'd trained together for months, run countless simulations, but nothing could truly prepare us for what we might find in the deepest part of the ocean. "All right," I said. "Let's make history." We climbed through the Manta's entry hatch and settled into our positions. The interior was cramped, but efficient. 3 seats arranged around a central control console, with specialized stations for each crew member. I took the pilot's position. Anya moved to the biology station on my right, and Marcus settled into the engineering console behind us. I ran through the startup sequence, watching as system after system came online. The main engines hummed to life, the ballast tanks responded to my commands, and the external cameras activated to show the Pathfinder's deck around us. "Pathfinder Control, this is Manta," I said into the communication system, requesting permission to launch. "Manta, this is Pathfinder Control. You are cleared for launch. Good luck down there." I activated the launch sequence and felt the cradle release the submersible. The Manta slipped into the water with barely a splash, and suddenly we were floating free on the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Sunlight filtered down through the clear water around us, But I knew that in a few hours, we'd be in a world where no sunlight had ever penetrated. "Beginning descent," I announced, adjusting the ballast tanks. The manta responded immediately, sinking beneath the surface as water rushed past the viewports. The first few thousand feet passed quickly. We dropped through the sunlight zone, where the water was still bright and clear, then into the twilight zone where the last traces of natural light faded to deep blue. Fish moved past our lights, tuna, sharks, and schools of smaller species that scattered as we approached. "Depth 5,000 feet, I called out. All systems normal. Anya was already at work, her instruments tracking the changing water chemistry and temperature as we descended. "Salinity levels are within expected parameters," she said. "Temperature dropping steadily. We're at 42 degrees Fahrenheit and falling." Marcus monitored the engineering systems, his eyes moving constantly between pressure readings and structural integrity displays. "Hull pressure at 220 pounds per square inch," he said. "Well, within tolerance." We continued down through the midnight zone, where the water turned black except for the occasional flash of bioluminescent creatures. Strange fish with glowing lures drifted past our lights, and I caught glimpses of jellyfish that pulsed with their own internal illumination. "Depth 15,000 feet, I announced. The pressure readings were climbing steadily, but the manta was handling it perfectly. Marcus had designed the hull to withstand pressures far beyond what we'd encounter today. "Water temperature is now 34 degrees, Anya said. "We're approaching the thermocline boundary." At 20,000 feet, we entered the abyssal zone. The water here was near freezing, and the pressure was crushing, over 800 pounds per square inch. But the manta continued its steady descent, its lights cutting through the absolute darkness. "Depth 25,000 feet, I said, approaching the barrier zone. Anya's instruments began showing the first signs of the anomaly. "Water chemistry is starting to change," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "Mineral content is increasing, and I'm detecting trace elements that shouldn't exist at this depth. Temperature differential is becoming more pronounced," Marcus added. "The thermal shielding is working, but we're definitely entering uncharted territory." At 27,000 feet, we hit the first real resistance. The water around us began to shimmer with heat distortion, and the manta's movement became sluggish as we encountered the thermal barrier that had stopped every previous expedition. "This is it," I said, adjusting the engine power. "The barrier." The submersible shuddered as we pushed through layers of water with dramatically different temperatures and chemical compositions. It was like trying to dive through liquid glass. The barrier resisted our passage, creating turbulence that rattled the hull. "Hull integrity holding," Marcus reported, but I could hear the strain in his voice. "Pressure differential is extreme, but we're still within acceptable limits." "Water chemistry is completely different now," Anya said, staring at her readings in amazement. "The mineral content has tripled, and I'm detecting compounds I've never seen before." I pushed the engines to maximum power and felt the manta break through the final layer of the barrier. Suddenly, we were in calm water again, but everything had changed. The temperature readings showed water that was actually warmer than what we'd left above, and Anya's instruments were going crazy with new data. "Depth 28,500 feet, I announced. "We're through the barrier." "My God," Anya whispered, staring at her displays. "Elias, look at these readings. The ecosystem down here is completely isolated. The water chemistry is like nothing I've ever seen." I activated the external floodlights and felt my breath catch in my throat. Below us stretched an abyssal plain, unlike anything in the known ocean. The seafloor was covered with what looked like plants, massive bioluminescent organisms that pulsed with their own light. They swayed in the current like underwater forests, their glow creating an alien landscape of blues and greens. "Are you seeing this?" Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. Those can't be plants. Nothing grows at this depth. But Anya was already analyzing the data. They're not plants, she said. They're some kind of chemosynthetic organism. They're converting the mineral-rich water into energy. This is incredible. These species should have been extinct for millions of years. I maneuvered the manta across the plain, our lights revealing more impossible sights. Creatures moved between the glowing organisms, things that looked like they belonged in the fossil record, not in the modern ocean. I saw what appeared to be a massive crinoid, its feathery arms reaching up toward us, and schools of fish with primitive features that suggested they were evolutionary throwbacks. This is a living museum, Anya said, her fingers flying over her instruments as she tried to document everything. These organisms have been isolated down here for geological ages. They've evolved in complete separation from the rest of the ocean. The barrier, I said, understanding flooding through me. It's not just a thermal boundary. It's been protecting this ecosystem, keeping it separate from the modern ocean. Marcus was recording everything, his engineering mind trying to process what we were seeing. The mineral content in the water must be feeding these organisms, he said. They've adapted to conditions that would be toxic to surface life. We spent the next hour exploring the plain, documenting species that science had never seen. Anya was in her element, her excitement infectious as she identified organism after organism that challenged everything we knew about deep-sea life. There, she said suddenly, pointing to her sonar display. Something big is moving about 200 meters to our north. I adjusted course and saw it, a creature the size of a school bus moving slowly across the seafloor. It had the segmented body of an ancient arthropod, with multiple legs that stirred up clouds of sediment as it walked. Its carapace was covered with the same bioluminescent patterns as the other organisms. It's a eurypterid, Anya breathed, a sea scorpion, but they've been extinct for 250 million years. Not down here, I said, watching the massive creature continue its slow journey across the plain. Down here, they never went extinct. We followed the creature for several minutes, Anya documenting its behavior while Marcus monitored our systems. The manta was performing perfectly, its advanced technology allowing us to observe this prehistoric world without disturbing it. Passive sonar is picking up more movement, Anya said, adjusting her instruments. There's a lot of activity in this area. I was about to respond when her sonar display lit up with a massive contact. Something enormous was moving above us, blocking out our lights from the surface. The contact was so large it filled the entire display. "What is that?" Marcus said, leaning forward to look at the readings. Anya's face had gone pale. "I don't know," she said, "but it's huge, bigger than anything that should exist at this depth." The proximity alarm suddenly screamed through the cabin, its piercing wail cutting through our amazement. I looked up through the main viewport and saw a shadow passing overhead, something so massive it blocked out the faint glow from the organisms around us. "Brace for impact!" I shouted. The strike hit us like a freight train. The manta lurched violently to starboard, throwing all three of us against our restraints. Alarms blared throughout the cabin as the submersible tumbled through the water, completely out of control. I fought to regain control of the manta as the submersible shuddered from the impact. My hands flew across the control panel, checking system after system, while the hull groaned around us. The stabilizers kicked in, and I managed to level us out. But something felt wrong. The whole vessel seemed to list slightly to port. "External cameras," I muttered, switching to the hull-mounted feeds. The first few showed nothing but darkness, but when I cycled to the port-side camera, my blood went cold. Gouges, deep parallel scratches ran along the hull plating like someone had dragged massive claws across the metal. but these weren't claw marks. I zoomed in closer and felt my stomach drop. Teeth marks. Individual punctures where something had bitten down on our hull, each one the size of a human hand. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "What is it?" Anya asked from her station, but I couldn't answer. I was too busy staring at the evidence of what had just attacked us. Whatever had hit us was still out there. I could feel it watching us from the darkness beyond our lights. The water around the manta seemed different now, charged with a predatory presence that made every nerve in my body scream danger. I pushed the engines to maximum power without warning the crew. The manta lurched forward, and I heard Marcus curse as he grabbed his console for support. "Elias, what the hell? We need to move. Now." I angled us upward, trying to gain altitude while pushing toward the thermal barrier. If we could make it back through, maybe whatever was down here couldn't follow. The engines whined as I demanded everything they had, but we were moving too slowly. The manta wasn't built for speed. Something massive moved in the darkness to our starboard side. I caught it on the edge of our lights, a shadow that was too big, too purposeful. It paced us effortlessly, staying just outside our visual range while we struggled to escape. "There," Anya said, pointing at her sonar display. "Something large. Very large." The contact on her screen was enormous, easily 3 times the length of our submersible. It moved with deadly precision through the water, adjusting its position to stay parallel with our course. We weren't escaping. We were being herded. I tried to change direction, banking hard to port, but the thing in the darkness anticipated the move. It cut across our path, forcing me to pull back on the controls to avoid a collision. Whatever was out there, it was intelligent. It knew exactly what it was doing. "Elias," Marcus said quietly, "look at the forward camera." I switched feeds and felt the world tilt around me. Rising from the depths directly ahead of us was something that shouldn't exist. A massive triangular head emerged from the darkness, followed by a body that seemed to go on forever. The creature's skin was scarred and ancient, marked by countless battles in the deep. Its eyes, each one larger than our entire viewport, reflected our lights with an intelligence that was utterly terrifying. A megalodon. But not like anything from the fossil record. This thing was impossibly huge, easily 60 feet long, maybe more. Its massive bulk moved through the water with a grace that defied physics, every movement calculated and predatory. The creature's mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of teeth that could have been used as swords. Each one was perfectly white and razor sharp, designed for one purpose: killing. The thing studied us for a moment, tilting its massive head like it was deciding what to do with the strange metal object that had invaded its territory. Then it struck. The impact threw me against my restraint so hard I saw stars. The manta spun like a toy as the creature's jaws clamped down around our midsection. I heard the hull plating buckle and scream under the pressure. Alarms started blaring throughout the cockpit. Hull breach warnings, pressure alerts, structural failure indicators. "Hull integrity compromised," Marcus shouted over the noise. "We're losing pressure in sections 4 through 7. The creature's teeth punched through our outer hull like it was made of tinfoil. I watched the pressure readings spike as water started forcing its way into the damaged compartments. The manta's emergency systems kicked in, sealing off the breached sections, but I could feel the submersible groaning under the immense pressure of those jaws. Anya was thrown from her seat as the megalodon shook us like a dog with a chew toy. She hit the bulkhead hard and slumped to the deck, blood running from a cut on her forehead. I tried to reach for her, but my restraints held me in place as the creature continued to test our hull's limits. The engines were useless. Every time I tried to engage them, the creature's grip tightened and more alarms started screaming. We were completely trapped, held fast in jaws that could crush a city bus without effort. But the strangest thing was that it wasn't crushing us. The megalodon had the power to bite the manta in half, but instead it held us carefully, almost gently, like it was deciding what to do with us. Then I felt us moving, not forward or backward, but down. The creature was dragging us deeper into the trench, carrying us in its mouth like some kind of prize. The depth gauge spun wildly as we descended. 29,000 feet, 30,000, 31,000. "Where is it taking us?" Anya asked weakly, pulling herself back into her seat. I had no idea, but I knew it wasn't good. We were completely at the mercy of this prehistoric monster, and all our advanced technology meant absolutely nothing. The manta's sophisticated systems, our years of training, our carefully planned mission, none of it mattered down here. We were just prey being carried off by an apex predator that had ruled these depths for millions of years. The creature's massive form moved through the water with terrifying purpose, and I realized with growing horror that we were about to discover exactly what happened to things that wandered into the domain of the deep ocean's ultimate predator. I listened to Anya's voice cut through the chaos of alarms and groaning metal. She was hunched over her biology station, fingers flying across the display as data streamed in from the external sensors. "This isn't random predation," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "Look at the attack patterns. The creature's testing our structural integrity, not trying to consume us." I glanced at her screen while keeping one hand on the control panel. The sonar readings showed the massive shapes circling us in deliberate patterns, each pass bringing it closer to specific sections of the hull. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already understood what she was getting at. "It's territorial behavior," Anya continued, tapping her screen where the creature's movement patterns were mapped out. "The way it's positioning itself, the calculated strikes. This thing sees us as an invader in its domain, not prey. It's trying to drive us out or establish dominance." The manta shuddered again as something massive scraped along our starboard side. I felt the vibration through the deck plating, a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard magnified 1,000 times. "That's great and all," Marcus called from the engineering bay, his voice strained. "But territorial or not, this thing's about to crack us open like an egg." I could see him through the open hatch, tools scattered around him as he worked frantically on an access panel. Sparks flew from exposed wiring, and the smell of burning electronics filled the air. "Talk to me, Marcus," I said. "How bad is it?" "Bad," he replied without looking up. "I've got microfractures spreading along the primary hull sections. The pressure's mounting faster than our emergency systems can compensate. At this rate, we've got maybe 10 minutes before total structural failure." Another impact rocked the submersible, this one harder than the others. I watched the hull integrity readings drop another 5% on my display. The creature was learning, adapting its attacks to find our weak points. "There has to be something we can do," I muttered, running through our options. The engines were damaged, navigation was compromised, and we were trapped in the jaws of a prehistoric nightmare. That's when it hit me. I turned to look at the ARP console, the acoustic resonance projector we'd installed for geological surveys. It was designed to map seafloor structures using concentrated sound waves, but if we could modify it. "Marcus," I called out. "The ARP. Can you bypass the safety limiters?" He paused his work and looked at me through the hatch. "The acoustic projector? Why would you want to?" His eyes widened as he understood. "You want to weaponize it." "Exactly," I said. "If we can reroute power from the main core and remove the safety restrictions, we might be able to generate a sonic blast powerful enough to wound this thing." Anya looked up from her station. The acoustic resonance frequency could disrupt its inner ear, cause disorientation or pain. It might work. Marcus was already moving, pulling himself deeper into the engineering bay. I'd need to bypass 3 separate safety systems and reroute the entire power grid. One mistake and we lose everything. Life support, propulsion, the works. And if we don't try? I asked. Another grinding impact answered for me. This time I heard something crack. Not just the groaning of stressed metal, but the sharp snap of structural failure. Emergency lights flickered as power fluctuated throughout the submersible. Hull breach in Section 4, Anya reported, her voice tight. Automatic seals are holding, but barely. Marcus was already deep in the access panel, his hands moving with desperate precision. I can do it, he said. But you need to understand. This is all or nothing. Either we break free or we destroy every system on this boat trying. I watched the hull integrity readings continue to drop. 85%, 82%. The creature was relentless, each attack more focused than the last. It had figured out exactly where to hit us for maximum damage. Do it, I said. Marcus nodded and disappeared completely into the engineering bay. I could hear him working. The sound of tools on metal, the hiss of disconnected power couplings, his muttered curses as he fought to rewire systems that were never meant to be modified. Power rerouting in progress, he called out. I'm pulling everything from non-essential systems. You'll have maybe 30 seconds of full power to the ARP before the grid overloads. The manta lurched violently to port as the creature struck us again. This time I felt something give way completely. A deep, resonant crack that seemed to come from the very bones of the submersible. Primary viewport, Anya said, pointing to the main observation window. I could see it now, a hairline fracture running diagonally across the reinforced glass. As I watched, the crack spread another inch. How long, Marcus? I shouted. Almost there, came his reply, followed by a shower of sparks from the engineering bay. Just need to bypass the final safety interlock. The creature circled us again, and I could see its massive form through the damaged viewport. It was studying us, those ancient eyes calculating our weaknesses with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. This wasn't just a predator. It was a thinking, reasoning apex hunter that had ruled these depths for millions of years. Got it, Marcus announced. ARP is armed and ready. You've got one shot at this, Elias. Make it count. I moved to the acoustic projector controls, my hands hovering over the activation sequence. The creature was positioning itself for another attack, its massive bulk blotting out what little light filtered down from above. The hull continued to deteriorate around us, each second bringing us closer to catastrophic failure as the ancient predator tested our limits with methodical precision. I watched the primary viewport with growing dread as hairline cracks spread across the reinforced glass like a spider web. The fractures branched out from a central impact point, each new line appearing with a soft clicking sound that cut through the chaos of alarms and groaning metal. The megalodon was testing us, probing for weaknesses, and it was finding them. Marcus, how much longer? I called out, my voice tight with urgency. Almost there, he shouted back from the engineering bay. 30 more seconds, maybe 40. The power coupling is fighting me. The hull shuddered again as something massive scraped along our starboard side. I could feel the creature's presence through the metal, a weight that seemed to press against my chest. The viewport creaked ominously, and I watched another crack appear near the bottom edge. We don't have 30 seconds, I muttered, checking the structural integrity readings on my console. The numbers were dropping fast. We were at 12% and falling. Any lower and the hull would collapse like a tin can. Anya looked up from her station, blood still trickling from the cut on her forehead. The fractures are spreading too quickly. If that viewport fails, it won't, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The manta lurched suddenly as the megalodon grabbed us again, this time from below, I felt the submersible being lifted, then shaken like a toy in the jaws of some enormous dog. Tools scattered across the floor, and I had to grip my console to keep from being thrown around. I didn't hesitate. My hand slammed down on the activation switch, and the acoustic resonance projector came online with a deep, thrumming hum that I could feel in my bones. The sound built quickly, rising in pitch and intensity until it became almost unbearable. "Firing now," I announced, and pressed the discharge button. The ARP unleashed its concentrated wave of sonic energy in a focused beam that cut through the water like an invisible blade. I watched the external cameras as the blast hit the megalodon directly in its massive head. The effect was immediate and violent. The creature's entire body convulsed as if it had been struck by lightning. Its jaws snapped open involuntarily, releasing the manta with such force that we tumbled through the water. The megalodon's eyes rolled back, showing white, and its massive form writhed in what looked like agony. Blood began streaming from its gills as the sonic assault disrupted its nervous system. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction as the ancient predator thrashed helplessly in the water. The ARP had worked better than I dared hope. The creature's movements became increasingly erratic, and then it began to retreat, sinking back into the darker depths below us, with powerful but unsteady strokes of its tail. "It's working," Anya breathed, watching her sonar display. "The creature is moving away from us." But our victory was short-lived. As the immediate threat receded, the full extent of our situation became clear. I ran a quick systems check and felt my heart sink. The main engines were completely offline. The megalodon's attacks had severed critical power lines and damaged the propulsion systems beyond repair. The ballast tanks were responding sluggishly, if at all, and our life support systems were running on backup power. "Marcus, what's our status?" I called out. He emerged from the engineering bay, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Not good. Main engines are dead. Ballast control is compromised, and we're losing atmosphere faster than the scrubbers can compensate. We've got maybe 6 hours of breathable air left, assuming no more hull breaches." I checked our depth gauge and watched the numbers slowly climbing. 29,200 feet. 29,300. We were sinking, drifting down into the abyss like a wounded whale. "Can you get the engines back online?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the look on Marcus's face. "Not without a full repair bay and about 3 days of work. The power couplings are fried, and half the control circuits are shot. We're dead in the water." Anya looked up from her console, her face pale in the emergency lighting. "The creature is still out there. I'm tracking it on passive sonar. It's circling us at about a half-mile radius. It's hurt, but it's not giving up." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold water surrounding us. We were trapped in the megalodon's territory, wounded and helpless. The creature knew we were here, and it was patient. It could afford to wait while we slowly sank into its domain. "What about the ARP?" I asked. "Can we use it again?" Marcus shook his head grimly. "The capacitors need at least 4 hours to recharge after a discharge like that. And that's assuming the system doesn't overload from the stress we just put it through. 4 hours. We'd be long dead by then, either from system failure or from the creature's next attack." I stared at the depth gauge as it continued its relentless climb upward. 29,400 feet. 29,500. The manta groaned around us, a sound like a dying animal. Somewhere in the darkness below, I knew the megalodon was waiting, watching, planning its next move. We'd heard it, but we hadn't killed it, and now we were sinking slowly into its hunting grounds with no way to defend ourselves and no way to escape. I looked at the cracked viewport, at the stress fractures that continued to spread across the reinforced glass. and realized that our brief moment of triumph had only delayed the inevitable. We were still trapped in the abyss, still at the mercy of a creature that had ruled these depths for millions of years. The emergency lights cast everything in a hellish red glow as we continued our slow descent into the darkness, powerless to stop our fall into the domain of the ancient predator that waited somewhere below. I killed the lights first. The external floods went dark, plunging us into complete blackness except for the red glow of emergency lighting inside the cockpit. My hands moved across the control panel, shutting down everything we didn't absolutely need to stay alive. "What are you doing?" Anya whispered from her station. "Powering down," I said quietly. "We need to go dark. That thing is hunting us, and every system we run makes noise." I switched off the navigation beacon, the sonar pings, even the air recycling fans. The sudden silence was eerie, just the faint hum of life support and the occasional groan of the hull settling under pressure. Through the cracked viewport, I could see nothing but absolute darkness. Marcus crawled back from the engineering bay, moving carefully to avoid making noise. "How long can we stay like this?" he whispered. "Long enough, I hope." I checked the power readings. With most systems offline, we had maybe 8 hours of battery life left. After that, we'd be breathing recycled air until the scrubbers failed. A shadow passed overhead. I held my breath, watching the darkness above us. The shadow was massive, easily 3 times our length, moving with the fluid grace of a predator that owned these waters. The megalodon was searching, probably following our scent trail or the electromagnetic signature of our systems. "There," Anya breathed, pointing at her passive sonar display. The screen showed a large contact, moving in a grid pattern about 200 feet above us. "It's hunting systematically." The creature made another pass, closer this time. I could feel the pressure wave as it moved through the water, a subtle shift that made the manta rock slightly. We were sitting on a ledge of rock about halfway down the trench wall, using the natural formation to break up our outline. I'd maneuvered us here after the ARP attack, using the last of our engine power to tuck the manta into this crevice. The rock overhang provided some concealment, but if the megalodon came down to investigate directly, we'd be trapped with nowhere to run. Another shadow passed, this one moving from port to starboard. The creature was circling, expanding its search pattern. I watched the depth gauge. We were still sinking slowly, the damaged ballast tanks unable to maintain neutral buoyancy. Every few minutes we dropped another 10 feet deeper into the trench. A low, resonant call echoed through the water. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, part whale song, part something far more ancient and predatory. The hull vibrated with the frequency, and I felt it in my chest like a physical presence. "It's echolocating," Anya whispered, trying to bounce sound off us. The call came again, closer this time. I gripped the control stick, ready to fire the maneuvering thrusters if we were discovered, but that would give away our position immediately. We had to stay perfectly still and hope the rock formation masked our signature. Marcus was checking his instruments, his face grim in the red emergency lighting. "Main engines are completely dead," he reported quietly. "Power coupling is fried, and we've got coolant leaking into the engine compartment. Even if we had full power, I couldn't get them running again." "What about the ballast tanks?" "Compromised. We're taking on water slowly but steadily. I can't stop it without shutting down life support to reroute power to the pumps." Another call echoed through the depths, and this time I saw movement on the passive sonar. The megalodon was descending, following the sound waves down toward our position. My heart hammered against my ribs as the massive contact grew larger on the screen. "It's coming down," Anya whispered. I watched the creature's approach, calculating distances and angles. If it came much closer, it would spot us visually. The emergency lights inside the cockpit were dim, but they might still be visible through the viewport. The shadow passed directly overhead, so close I could make out details of its massive form. Scars crisscrossed its hide, and its fins moved with deliberate precision as it searched. For a moment, I thought it had seen us. The great head turned slightly in our direction, and I caught a glimpse of one enormous eye reflecting the faint light from our instruments. Then it moved on, continuing its patrol pattern. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That was too close. "It's not giving up," Anya said, studying her readings. "Look at this behavior pattern. It's not random hunting. It's methodical, intelligent. This creature has been the apex predator down here for millions of years." She pulled up more data on her screen, keeping her voice low. "The water chemistry readings I took earlier, they're fascinating. The thermal barrier isn't just a temperature differential. It's a complete chemical boundary. The water below has a different mineral content, different dissolved gases, even different pressure characteristics. What does that mean for us? It means this ecosystem is completely isolated. Everything down here has adapted to these specific conditions over geological time periods. That megalodon isn't just big, it's perfectly evolved for this environment." Marcus looked up from his diagnostics. "Are you saying it can't leave?" "I'm saying the water chemistry above the barrier would be toxic to its specialized physiology. Its gills, its blood chemistry, even its pressure regulation. Everything is adapted to this specific environment. If it tried to follow us through the barrier..." She didn't finish the thought, but I understood. The creature was as trapped down here as we were, bound by the same chemical barrier that had hidden this prehistoric world from the surface. Another call echoed through the water, fainter this time. The megalodon was moving away, expanding its search to other areas of the trench. But I knew it would be back. Predators like this didn't give up easily, especially when they'd been injured and challenged in their own territory. I checked our power levels again. 7 hours and 43 minutes of battery life remaining. The air recycling system was running on minimum power, and I could already smell the staleness creeping in. We were slowly suffocating in our metal tomb, hidden in the rocks, while a prehistoric monster hunted us in the darkness above. The manta settled another few feet deeper into the trench, the hull groaning softly as the pressure increased. Through the cracked viewport, I stared into the absolute blackness of the abyss, knowing that somewhere out there, 60 feet of pure predatory evolution was searching for us with the patience of something that had ruled these depths since before humans walked the earth. I stared at the depth gauge as the numbers kept climbing. 32,000 feet, 33,000. We were sinking deeper into the trench with every passing minute, and our options were running out fast. The emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly red glow, and I could hear the hull creaking under the immense pressure. "Marcus," I called out, keeping my voice low. "We need to talk about getting out of here." He crawled over from the engineering bay, his face grim. "I've been thinking the same thing. We can't stay down here much longer." Anya looked up from her station, the cut on her forehead still visible. "The creature's moved off for now, but it's still out there. I can track it on passive sonar." I nodded, studying the control panel. "What are our options? The main engines are dead, ballast control is compromised. How do we get back to the surface?" Marcus wiped his hands on his jumpsuit. "There's one way, but it's risky as hell. We could manually detonate the ballast tanks." "Detonate them?" I turned to face him. "What does that mean exactly?" "Emergency ascent procedure," he explained, pulling up a schematic on his console. We blow the tanks completely. All the water gets forced out at once. The manta would shoot to the surface like a cork. I felt my stomach drop. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is. We'd have no control over the ascent rate. The pressure changes alone could kill us, and if we hit something on the way up... He shrugged. But it's the only way to get enough lift to break through the thermal barrier. Anya leaned forward. What about the creature? Won't the noise attract it? Definitely, Marcus said. The explosion will be loud enough to wake the dead. But if we time it right, we might be able to outrun it. Walk me through it, I said. How does this work? Marcus pulled himself closer to the engineering console. I'd have to manually override the safety systems and rig the ballast tanks to blow simultaneously. It's not what they're designed for, but the explosive bolts should do the job. How long would it take to set up? Maybe 10 minutes if everything goes right, but once I start the sequence, there's no going back. We'd have about 30 seconds before detonation. I looked at the cracked viewport, watching the stress fractures spread slowly across the reinforced glass. We were trapped down here with a territorial predator that wanted us dead, our life support failing and no way to repair the engines. The manual ascent might be suicide, but staying here definitely was. Do it, I decided. Get everything ready. Marcus nodded and started pulling access panels off the engineering console. I'll need to reroute power from the emergency batteries and bypass about 6 different safety protocols. While he worked, I kept watch on the sonar display. The megalodon was still out there, circling at the edge of our sensor range. Anya monitored the water chemistry readings, tracking any changes that might indicate the creature was moving closer. "How's it looking, Marcus?" I asked after a few minutes. "Almost there. Just need to connect the detonation circuit to the manual trigger." He was elbow deep in wiring, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "This is definitely not in the manual." I felt the manta shift slightly as we settled deeper into the trench. The hull groaned, and I watched the structural integrity readings drop another percentage point. We were running out of time. "Got it," Marcus announced, pulling his hands out of the access panel. "The system's armed. When I hit this switch, we'll have 30 seconds before the tanks blow." I moved my hands to the control stick, ready to steer us through whatever came next. "Anya, what's the creature doing?" "Still circling, but it's moved closer. I think it knows we're here." I took a deep breath. "All right, everyone strap in. This is going to be rough." Marcus positioned his hand over the detonation switch. "Ready when you are." "Do it." He slammed his palm down on the switch. Immediately, warning lights flashed across every console, and a computerized voice began counting down from 30 seconds. The Manta's systems went into emergency mode, and I could hear machinery whirring as the explosive charges armed themselves. 25 seconds, the computer announced. I gripped the controls tighter, watching the sonar display. The megalodon had stopped circling and was now moving directly toward us. 20 seconds. "It's coming," Anya said, her voice tight with fear. "Fast." 15 seconds. The creature appeared on our forward cameras, its massive form cutting through the water with terrifying speed. Its eyes reflected our emergency lights, and I could see its jaws beginning to open. 10 seconds. "Hold on," I shouted. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The explosion ripped through the water beneath us with a deafening roar. I felt the manta lurch violently as the ballast tanks blew simultaneously, forcing out thousands of gallons of water in an instant. The submersible shot upward like a bullet, and I was slammed back into my seat as we rocketed toward the surface. The acceleration was brutal. My vision blurred as the G-forces hit, and I could hear Anya crying out from her station. The hull shuddered and groaned as we tore through the water column, climbing faster than any submersible was meant to move. I fought to keep my eyes focused on the controls, watching our depth gauge spin backward. 31,000 feet, 30,000, 29,000. We were climbing at an incredible rate, but I could already hear the megalodon's response. A deep, resonating call echoed through the water behind us, and I knew the creature was giving chase. I switched to the rear camera and saw it pursuing us from below, its massive tail driving it upward with powerful strokes. The thing was fast, faster than I'd hoped. "It's following us," I managed to say through gritted teeth. Marcus was pressed back in his seat, his face pale. "How close?" I checked the sonar. "Too close. It's gaining on us." 28,000 feet. We were approaching the thermal barrier, but the megalodon was closing the distance. I could see it clearly now on the rear camera, its prehistoric form cutting through the water with deadly efficiency. Its jaws were partially open, revealing those massive teeth. 27,000 feet. The creature was maybe 200 feet behind us and still gaining. At this rate, it would catch us before we reached the barrier. "Come on," I whispered, willing the manta to climb faster. The megalodon suddenly put on a burst of speed, its tail thrashing with renewed fury. It was angry. We'd invaded its territory and now we were trying to escape. I could see the intelligence in its movements, the calculated way it angled its approach to intercept us. 26,000 feet, 150 feet behind us. "It's going to catch us," Anya said, her voice barely audible over the rushing water and groaning metal. I pushed the emergency thrusters, trying to squeeze every bit of speed from our damaged systems. The manta responded sluggishly, but we gained a few precious feet per second. 25,000 feet. The megalodon was now less than 100 feet away, and I could see its massive head filling the rear camera display. Its eyes were locked on us with predatory focus. The creature suddenly angled upward, positioning itself for a ramming attack. I realized it wasn't trying to bite us. It was going to hit us from below, disable our ascent, and drag us back down to its domain. "Brace for impact," I shouted. The megalodon struck us from beneath with tremendous force. The manta spun wildly, and I lost control of our ascent vector. Alarms blared as the hull took another beating, and I could feel the structural integrity dropping even further. But we were still climbing. The explosive force from the ballast tanks was too powerful for even the megalodon to completely stop. We tumbled through the water, spinning end over end. But our upward momentum carried us higher. 24,000 feet. The creature hit us again, this time from the side. The impact threw me against my restraints, and I tasted blood in my mouth. The manta's hull buckled, and I heard something important break in the engineering section. "Hull breach in Section 6, Marcus called out, his voice strained. 23,000 feet. The megalodon was relentless, striking us repeatedly as we climbed. Each impact sent shockwaves through the submersible, and I could see new cracks spreading across the viewport. But the creature was also struggling with the rapid pressure changes as we ascended. 22,000 feet. I noticed the megalodon's movements becoming less coordinated. The rapid ascent was affecting it too. Its specialized physiology was adapted for the extreme depths, not the changing pressures of a high-speed climb. 21,000 feet. The creature made one more desperate attack, ramming us with its full body weight. The manta shuddered and spun, but we kept climbing. I could see confusion in the megalodon's eyes now, as if it was beginning to realize something was wrong. 20,000 feet. The thermal barrier was just ahead, a shimmering distortion in the water that marked the boundary between the creature's domain and the upper ocean. The megalodon was still with us, but its movements were becoming erratic. I gripped the controls and aimed the manta directly at the barrier. This was our only chance. If we could break through, The different water chemistry on the other side might be enough to stop our pursuer. 19,000 feet. The megalodon positioned itself for one final attack, its massive jaws opening wide as it prepared to crush the manta between its teeth. I could see every detail of its ancient face, the scars and markings that spoke of countless battles in the deep. The creature lunged forward just as we hit the thermal barrier. I felt the manta smash through the thermal barrier like we'd hit a brick wall. The whole submersible shuddered and groaned as we punched through that invisible boundary, and I could hear the hull plating screaming under the stress. Behind us, the megalodon's massive jaws were still wide open, those rows of teeth gleaming in our lights as the creature followed us through. The thing was absolutely furious. I'd never seen anything move with that kind of rage before. Pure territorial fury driving it to chase us even beyond its domain. The creature's eyes were locked on us, and I could see the intelligence there, the determination to destroy what had invaded its world. But something was wrong. The moment we cleared the barrier, the megalodon started convulsing. Its massive body twisted and writhed as if something was attacking it from the inside. The creature's gills, which had been working perfectly in the deep water below, suddenly started fluttering erratically. "What's happening to it?" Anya called out from her station, watching the readings on her screen. I kept my eyes on the creature through the rear camera. The water chemistry was different up here. We'd crossed back into normal ocean water, and the megalodon's specialized physiology couldn't handle it. The thing had evolved to survive in that isolated ecosystem below the barrier, and now it was paying the price for leaving it. The creature's movements became more desperate, more frantic. Its gills were failing completely now, unable to process the different mineral content and chemical composition of the water above the barrier. Blood started streaming from the gill slits as the delicate tissues inside began to rupture. "It's dying," I said, watching the massive predator struggle. "The water chemistry is killing it." The megalodon made one last attempt to reach us, its jaws snapping shut just feet from our stern, but the effort sent it into another violent convulsion. The creature's eyes rolled back, showing the whites, and its massive body went rigid for a moment before going completely limp. I watched through the camera as the dying megalodon collided with the trench wall, its body scraping against the rocky surface as it began to sink. The ancient predator that had ruled the depths for millions of years was falling back into its domain, but it would never hunt again. "Jesus," Marcus breathed from his console. "That thing followed us all the way up just to die." The manta was still rocketing upward through the water column, our emergency ascent carrying us toward the surface at a dangerous rate. I grabbed the controls and tried to slow our ascent, but the ballast system was completely shot. We were riding the momentum from the explosion, and there wasn't much I could do except try to keep us stable. "Hull breach in Section 6 is getting worse," Marcus reported, his hands flying over his instruments. "We're taking on water, but the pumps are keeping up for now." Anya was checking her readings, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The creature's physiology was completely adapted to the deep water environment. When it crossed the barrier, its entire respiratory system failed. I nodded, still watching our depth gauge as we climbed. 28,000 feet, 25,000, 20,000. We were making good time, but the manta was shaking like it was going to fall apart. "How are the life support systems holding up?" I asked Marcus. "Running on backup power, but we've got maybe 2 hours of air left," he said. "The main recycling unit took a hit when that thing grabbed us." I could feel the pressure changing as we rose, and my ears were starting to pop. The emergency lighting was still bathing everything in red, and alarms were going off all over the place. But we were alive, and we were heading for the surface. "Structural integrity is at 8%, Marcus called out. "If we hit anything else, we're done for." I kept the manta as steady as I could, fighting the controls as we continued our ascent. 15,000 feet. 10,000. The water was getting lighter around us, and I could see particles floating in our lights that hadn't been there in the deep. Anya was still monitoring her instruments, tracking our progress through the different water layers. We're passing through the twilight zone now. Water temperature is rising. 5,000 feet. 3,000. I could feel the difference in the water pressure, and the manta was responding better to the controls. The hull was still groaning, but it wasn't the same desperate sound we'd been hearing in the depths. "I'm seeing something on the surface sensors," Anya said, checking her display. "Looks like sunlight." I switched to the upward-facing camera and felt my heart jump. There it was, actual sunlight filtering down through the water above us. After hours in the absolute darkness of the deep ocean, seeing that golden glow was like seeing heaven itself. 1,000 feet. 500. The water was getting brighter and brighter, and I could see the surface rippling above us like a mirror. We were almost there. "Brace yourselves," I said, gripping the controls. "We're about to breach." The manta shot through the last few feet of water and burst through the surface with a tremendous splash. Suddenly we were bobbing in the waves, and real sunlight was streaming through the viewports. After the red emergency lighting, the natural light was almost blinding. I could hear water lapping against the hull, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the sound wasn't threatening. It was just the ocean being the ocean, not some prehistoric monster trying to tear us apart. "We made it," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We actually made it." I looked around the cockpit at Anya and Marcus, both of them looking as shell-shocked as I felt. Anya still had that cut on her forehead, and Marcus's jumpsuit was torn and stained with grease and coolant. We all looked like we'd been through hell, which I guess we had. The manta was listing badly to port, and I could hear water sloshing around in the damaged sections. We weren't going to stay afloat much longer, but we were on the surface, and that meant rescue was possible. I reached for the emergency beacon and activated it, sending out our distress signal. Somewhere up there, the Pathfinder was waiting for us, and they'd be monitoring the emergency frequencies. The sunlight felt warm on my face through the viewport, and I realized I was shaking. Not from cold or fear, but from the sheer relief of being alive. We'd gone down into the deepest part of the ocean, encountered something that shouldn't exist, and somehow made it back to tell the story. I felt the manta break through the surface with a violent lurch that threw me against my restraints. Water cascaded off the viewports as we bobbed in the waves, and for the first time in what felt like hours, natural sunlight flooded the cockpit. The terror that had gripped my chest since our encounter with the megalodon slowly began to ease, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. "We made it," I whispered, hardly believing the words myself. Anya slumped back in her chair, the cut on her forehead still bleeding but her eyes bright with exhaustion and relief. "I can't believe we're alive." Marcus let out a shaky laugh from his engineering station. "That thing nearly turned us into fish food." I looked around the cockpit, taking in the full extent of the damage for the first time. Warning lights blinked across every console. The hull breach alarms were still sounding, and I could hear water sloshing in the damaged sections below us. Cracks spider-webbed across the primary viewport where the megalodon's teeth had scraped against it. The metal plating around the entry hatch was dented and scored with deep gouges. "How bad is it, Marcus?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He pulled up the damage assessment on his screen. "Hull integrity is at 30%. We've got breaches in sections 4 through 7. The ballast tanks are completely shot, and the main engines are dead. Life support is running on backup power, and we've got maybe 2 hours of air left." I stared at the readings, realizing just how close we'd come to dying down there. If the emergency ascent hadn't worked, if the ballast tanks hadn't blown when they did, we'd still be trapped in that prehistoric nightmare with a 60-foot killing machine circling us. Pathfinder Control, this is Manta. Do you copy? Static filled the cockpit for several seconds before a voice crackled through. Manta, this is Pathfinder Control. We've been monitoring your beacon. What's your status? We're on the surface, but taking on water. We need immediate evacuation. 3 souls on board, all conscious. Copy that, Manta. Rescue teams are already en route to your position. ETA 15 minutes. Can you maintain buoyancy until then? I looked at Marcus, who was frantically working at his console. He gave me a thumbs up. We'll manage, I told Pathfinder. The next 15 minutes felt like an eternity. The Manta listed further to port as more water flooded the damaged sections. I kept one eye on the depth gauge, watching our buoyancy slowly decrease. Anya monitored the passive sonar, making sure nothing was approaching from below, though I knew the megalodon was dead. I'd watched it convulse and sink back into the trench when the water chemistry above the barrier poisoned its ancient physiology. When the rescue boats finally appeared on the horizon, I felt another wave of relief wash over me. 2 fast response vessels approached our position, their crews already preparing for an emergency evacuation. The lead boat pulled alongside the Manta, and I could see the rescue team in their bright orange survival suits. Manta crew, this is Rescue 1. We're going to get you out of there. Prepare for evacuation. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The rescue team attached a stabilizing line to keep the Manta from rolling while they opened the emergency hatch. One by one, they helped us out of the sinking submersible. Anya went first, the medics immediately checking her head wound. Marcus followed, his jumpsuit torn and stained with hydraulic fluid. I was the last to leave, taking one final look at the Manta's battered hull before climbing into the rescue boat. As we pulled away, I watched the submersible that had been our home for 3 weeks slowly settle lower in the water. The rescue team had attached emergency flotation devices to keep it from sinking completely, but it was clear the Manta would never dive again. The medical team on the rescue boat checked us over thoroughly. Anya needed stitches for her head wound, and Marcus had bruised ribs from being thrown around during the megalodon's attacks. I had somehow escaped with only minor cuts and bruises, though my hands wouldn't stop shaking. You're lucky to be alive, one of the medics told me as he cleaned a gash on my arm. What happened down there? I looked at him, then at Anya and Marcus, and realized I didn't know how to begin explaining what we'd encountered. How do you tell someone you've seen a living fossil? A creature that should have been extinct for millions of years? How do you describe the terror of being hunted by something that massive and intelligent? Equipment failure, I said finally. We had to make an emergency ascent. The medic nodded and continued his work, but I could see the questions in his eyes. The official debriefing would come later, and I'd have to figure out what to tell them then. The trip back to the Pathfinder took 40 minutes. As we approached the research vessel, I could see the crew lining the rails, watching our return. They'd been monitoring our dive from the beginning, tracking our descent through the thermal barrier and losing contact when we went dark to hide from the megalodon. For all they knew, we'd simply vanished into the abyss. Captain Rodriguez met us at the gangway as we boarded the Pathfinder. Good to see you 3 in one piece, he said, though his expression was grim. We lost your signal for over 6 hours. What happened down there? We'll need to debrief properly, I told him. But we encountered something unexpected below the barrier. He nodded. Medical first, then we'll talk. The company's already sending a team to investigate. The next few days passed in a haze of medical examinations, equipment inspections, and preliminary interviews. The company investigators wanted to know everything about the dive, the equipment failures, and our emergency ascent. I stuck to the technical details, describing the hull breaches and ballast system failures without mentioning their cause. Anya and Marcus followed my lead, though I could see the strain in their eyes. We'd all agreed not to mention the megalodon until we could figure out how to present our findings. The creature was dead, trapped forever in the Viridian Trench by its own evolutionary adaptations. There was no immediate danger to anyone else. But the nights were the worst. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those massive jaws opening in the darkness. I heard the sound of teeth scraping against the hull and felt the manta shudder under the creature's grip. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, reliving those moments when I thought we were all going to die. The company psychologist said it was normal trauma response, that the stress of the emergency ascent and near-death experience would fade with time. But I knew it was more than that. What we'd seen down there had changed something fundamental in my understanding of the world. I'd spent my entire career studying the deep ocean, thinking I understood its mysteries. I'd believed that science and technology could illuminate even the darkest corners of our planet. But the Viridian Trench had shown me how wrong I was. There were things down there that defied everything we thought we knew about evolution and extinction. The prehistoric ecosystem below the thermal barrier was like nothing in the fossil record. The megalodon we'd encountered wasn't just a survivor from the Miocene epoch. It was something that had continued evolving in isolation for millions of years. Its intelligence, its hunting strategies, its territorial behavior, all of it suggested a level of adaptation that challenged our basic assumptions about ancient marine life. And if one megalodon had survived, what else might be lurking in those depths? What other evolutionary impossibilities were thriving in the isolated world below the barrier? The questions haunted me as much as the nightmares. During the day, I went through the motions of the investigation, answering questions about equipment specifications and emergency procedures. But at night, I stared at the ceiling of my cabin and wondered if we should have died down there, if some discoveries were too dangerous to bring back to the surface. On the fourth day, as the Pathfinder headed back to port, I stood on the deck and looked out at the ocean. The water was calm, reflecting the afternoon sky like a mirror. It looked peaceful, almost serene. But I knew what lay beneath that placid surface. I knew about the thermal barriers and isolated ecosystems, about the ancient predators that ruled the deepest trenches. The ocean had always been humanity's final frontier, the last unexplored wilderness on our planet. But now, I understood why some frontiers remained unexplored. Some boundaries existed for good reason, and crossing them came with consequences we weren't prepared to face. I thought about the review board that would inevitably want a full report on our expedition. They'd want to know about the ecosystem below the barrier, about the potential for future research and exploration. They'd see the scientific value in what we'd discovered, the opportunity to study evolutionary processes in an isolated environment. But they hadn't seen those jaws opening in the darkness. They hadn't felt the manta shudder under the grip of something that should have been extinct for millions of years. They hadn't watched their instruments fail and their hull crack under the assault of a predator that viewed their advanced technology as nothing more than an interesting toy. The experience had fundamentally changed me in ways I was still trying to understand. I'd always been driven by scientific curiosity, by the desire to push the boundaries of human knowledge. But now I found myself questioning whether some boundaries should remain intact, whether some mysteries were better left unsolved. As the sun began to set, painting the ocean in shades of orange and red, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. When the review board asked for my recommendations about future exploration of the Viridian Trench, I would tell them the truth about what we'd found. and then I would recommend that they seal the charts and abandon any plans for further expeditions. Some discoveries, I realized, were too dangerous to pursue, and some horrors were better left sleeping in the depths where they belonged. I walked into the conference room 3 weeks after we'd surfaced from the Viridian Trench, and I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on me. The review board had assembled around a polished mahogany table. 5 people in dark suits who'd never been deeper than a swimming pool, ready to dissect what we'd experienced down there. "Dr. Vance," the chairman said, gesturing to the chair across from them. "Please have a seat." I sat down and placed my hands flat on the table, trying to keep them steady. The nightmares hadn't stopped. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those massive jaws opening in the darkness, felt the manta shuddering under the creature's grip. "We've reviewed the preliminary reports from you and your team," the woman to the chairman's left said, flipping through a thick folder. "But we'd like to hear the full account directly from you, as mission leader." I took a breath. We descended through the thermal barrier at 28,500 feet just as planned. What we found below was an isolated ecosystem that shouldn't exist. "Can you elaborate on that?" another board member asked. The water chemistry was completely different. Anya, Dr. Sharma, detected mineral concentrations that supported chemosynthetic organisms. We documented species that have been extinct for millions of years, massive eurypterids, bioluminescent organisms we'd never seen before. I paused, remembering the wonder in Anya's voice when she'd first seen the readings. That felt like a lifetime ago now. "And then," the chairman prompted, "we encountered a predator." The words came out harder than I'd intended. "A megalodon, over 60 feet long, perfectly adapted to that environment." The board members exchanged glances. One of them, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "Dr. Vance, megalodons have been extinct for over 2 million years. Not in the Viridian Trench," I said. "This creature was very much alive. It attacked the manta, nearly destroyed us. Dr. Sharma observed its behavior. It wasn't random predation. The creature was defending its territory." I described the parallel scratches on our hull, each puncture the size of a human hand, the way the creature had grabbed us and dragged us deeper, testing our structural integrity. How it had demonstrated intelligence, anticipating our movements. "We had to weaponize our acoustic resonance projector to drive it off temporarily," I continued, "but it damaged our main engines, compromised our ballast control. We were trapped down there with a predator that ruled those depths." The woman with the folder looked skeptical. "How did you escape?" "Emergency ascent. Marcus, our engineer, rigged the ballast tanks to blow simultaneously. It was our only option." I could still hear the countdown in my head, still see the megalodon charging toward us as we rose. The creature followed us through the thermal barrier. And then? The water chemistry change killed it. The megalodon was so perfectly adapted to that isolated environment that normal ocean water was toxic to its system. Its gills ruptured. We watched it die as we ascended. The room was quiet for a long moment. The chairman made notes on a legal pad, his pen scratching against the paper. "Dr. Vance," he said finally, "what's your professional assessment of this ecosystem?" I thought about Anya's readings, the impossible diversity we'd witnessed in those few hours before everything went wrong. It's a living fossil preserve. Somehow that section of the trench has remained isolated for millions of years, allowing extinct species to survive and evolve. The thermal barrier acts as a natural boundary, creating unique conditions that support life forms that died out everywhere else. "Fascinating," the thin man said. "The scientific implications are extraordinary." "They are," I agreed. "But so are the dangers. The chairman looked up from his notes. Dangers. That megalodon wasn't the only predator down there. We detected multiple large contacts on sonar. The entire ecosystem is built around apex predators that have had millions of years to perfect their hunting strategies. Any expedition into that environment would be at extreme risk. I leaned forward, meeting each of their gazes in turn. The creature that attacked us nearly killed 3 experienced deep-sea researchers with state-of-the-art equipment. It treated our submersible like a toy. If we'd been trapped down there much longer, we wouldn't have made it back. But surely with proper preparation, better equipment, the woman began. No. The word came out sharper than I'd intended. I've been doing deep-sea exploration for 15 years. I've never encountered anything like what's down there. Those creatures have been the undisputed rulers of their domain for millions of years. We were invaders, and they responded accordingly. The board members murmured among themselves. The chairman tapped his pen against his notepad. Dr. Vance, given your experience and observations, what would you recommend regarding future exploration of the Viridian Trench? This was the moment I'd been preparing for since we'd surfaced. I'd thought about it during every sleepless night, every time I'd jolted awake from dreams of massive teeth and crushing pressure. The thin man's eyebrows shot up. Dr. Vance, surely you understand the scientific value? I understand that 3 people nearly died discovering it, I interrupted. And that's with the creature following us out of its environment. If we'd been forced to stay down there, if we'd had to fight that thing on its own terms, we'd all be dead. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. The chairman studied me for a long moment. Dr. Vance, you seem affected by this experience. Wouldn't you be? I asked. We found a living piece of prehistoric Earth, and it nearly killed us for the privilege. That ecosystem has been isolated for millions of years for a reason. Breaking that isolation was a mistake. I could see the doubt in their faces, the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. They saw a researcher who'd been traumatized by a dangerous dive, not someone who'd witnessed something that challenged everything we thought we knew about extinction and evolution. Thank you, Dr. Vance, the chairman said finally. We'll take your recommendations under advisement. I nodded and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, the woman with the folder spoke up. Dr. Vance, off the record, do you really believe what you encountered down there was a megalodon? I turned back to face them, seeing the mixture of curiosity and skepticism in their expressions. They wanted to believe it was equipment malfunction, pressure psychosis, anything that fit into their understanding of how the world worked. I know what I saw, I said, and I know what it was capable of. That's why I'm recommending we never go back. I left them sitting around their polished table, probably already discussing how to phrase their report to minimize the more extraordinary claims. They'd focus on the technical aspects of the dive, the equipment failures, the emergency ascent procedures. The ecosystem would become a footnote, the megalodon a stress-induced hallucination. But I knew better. I'd looked into those ancient eyes and seen intelligence that had been perfecting the art of killing for millions of years. I'd felt the power in those jaws, seen the scars that marked a creature old enough to remember when the ocean was young. Walking down the hallway toward the exit, I thought about Anya and Marcus, both still recovering from the physical and psychological trauma of our encounter. We'd agreed to stick to the facts in our reports, but I wondered if they were having the same nightmares I was, the same moments of doubt about whether we'd made the right choice in keeping some details to ourselves. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. Through the building's windows, I could see the harbor where the Pathfinder was docked, being prepared for its next mission. Somewhere out there, the Viridian Trench waited in the darkness, its secrets protected by predators that had ruled the deep for longer than humans had walked the earth. I'd done what I could to keep others from making the same mistake we had. Whether the review board would listen was out of my hands now.